Between January 1944 and April 1945, Nazi Germany produced 1,430 Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighters, the world's first operational jet aircraft. 720 of these aircraft were built in underground factories converted from coal mines, constructed 400 meters below ground to escape Allied bombing. 12,000 concentration camp prisoners worked in these facilities. 3,800 died from malnutrition, disease, accidents, and execution. This is the story of one prisoner who faced an impossible choice: build weapons that would extend the war, or sabotage production and condemn his fellow prisoners to death. The micrometer read 0.03 millimeters off specification. Walter Reich checked the measurement again, pressing the instrument against the aluminum skin of the Me-262 fuselage section. Same result. The tolerance was 0.05 millimeters. This section exceeded acceptable variance. It would fail quality inspection. 2 hours remained before SS technical inspectors arrived for their daily review. 2 hours to decide whether to report the defect or attempt emergency correction that might damage the section further. The air at 400 meters underground burned his lungs with each breath. Coal dust from decades of mining operations coated everything: the fuselage sections, the assembly equipment, the walls, the machinery. Ventilation shafts brought air down from the surface, but it was never enough. The oxygen felt thin, inadequate. Workers developed persistent coughs within weeks of starting underground shifts. Many collapsed from respiratory failure. The SS replaced them with new prisoners from the camps. Around Walter, 60 other prisoners worked on separate components of the jet fighter assembly. Welders joined fuselage sections. Electricians installed wiring harnesses. Hydraulic specialists assembled landing gear. The entire factory operated in 3 shifts, 24 hours per day, producing components that would eventually be transported to surface facilities for final assembly. The underground location protected the factory from bombing, but created working conditions that killed prisoners almost as efficiently as Allied bombs killed surface workers. The factory occupied a coal mine that had been in operation since 1890. German engineers had expanded the main shaft and converted horizontal mining tunnels into factory spaces. Electric lights replaced miners' lamps. Assembly fixtures replaced coal extraction equipment. The basic infrastructure remained: support columns, rail tracks for material transport, elevator shafts connecting different levels. The space felt simultaneously industrial and primitive: modern manufacturing conducted in 19th-century mining infrastructure. Walter had been an aircraft engineer before his arrest. He had worked at Messerschmitt facilities in Augsburg, designing structural components for conventional fighters. In early 1943, during a private conversation with colleagues, he had expressed doubts about Germany's ability to win the war. Someone reported the conversation to Gestapo. Within a week, Walter was arrested for defeatism and sentenced to indefinite detention at Sachsenhausen concentration camp. 3 months later, when the SS needed skilled engineers for underground aircraft production, Walter was transferred to the mine facility along with 480 other prisoners with technical skills. The fuselage section that now measured incorrectly represented 12 hours of collective work. 6 prisoners had welded, formed, and fitted the aluminum sheets according to technical drawings. One error anywhere in that process, incorrect angle, excessive heat during welding, improper support during forming, could create the kind of tolerance violation Walter had just discovered. Finding the source of the error would take hours. Correcting it might be impossible without scrapping the entire section and starting over. Scrapping meant missing production quotas. Missing quotas meant reduced food rations for the entire work section and possible execution for prisoners deemed responsible. Franz Miller worked 3 stations away, installing electrical conduits in a different fuselage section. Franz was 52 years old, a master electrician who had been arrested for maintaining his union membership after unions were banned. The SS had transported him to this facility because electrical installation required precision that untrained prisoners couldn't provide. Franz had been here 11 months, longer than most prisoners survived underground work. His hands shook now from malnutrition and the cumulative effects of working in oxygen-depleted air. Walter had promised Franz's wife, through Red Cross communication channels, that he would keep Franz alive if possible. That promise had been foolish. Walter controlled nothing in this place. But he had made it anyway, because promises to the outside world helped maintain some connection to humanity that the camp system was designed to destroy. Franz's prisoner identification number was tattooed on his left forearm, visible whenever he reached up to install wiring. Walter saw that number every day and remembered the promise he couldn't possibly keep. The SS technical inspector who would arrive in 2 hours was Unterscharführer Klaus Weber, a civilian aircraft mechanic who had joined the SS in 1941 and now supervised quality control for underground production. Weber inspected with meticulous attention to technical specifications. He checked measurements, tested welds, verified component compatibility. His thoroughness wasn't motivated by dedication to aircraft quality, but by fear of being transferred to frontline SS combat units. As long as he found defects and maintained quality standards, he remained in this relatively safe position. Prisoners who produced components that failed inspection were beaten, given reduced rations, or executed depending on the severity of defect and Weber's mood that day. 6 weeks ago, another prisoner engineer named Ernst had miscalculated stress tolerances on a wing attachment bracket. The bracket passed initial inspection, but failed during ground testing when engineers at the surface assembly facility discovered the flaw. The SS traced the defect to Ernst's calculations. Guards removed him from the factory floor during evening shift. The prisoners heard a single gunshot from somewhere in the administrative tunnels. Ernst never returned. His workstation remained empty for 3 days before a new prisoner filled the position. Walter had known about Ernst's calculation error 2 days before it was discovered. He had noticed the bracket design on shared technical drawings and recognized the stress distribution problem immediately. But he had said nothing. Warning Ernst would have required explaining the error, which meant acknowledging he had been reviewing Ernst's work, which violated SS regulations about prisoners sharing technical information. Walter had calculated that remaining silent protected himself from punishment. Ernst died because Walter chose personal safety over collegiality. That calculation haunted Walter daily. The moral arithmetic of survival in the camp was straightforward and horrifying. Individual actions that might save one person often endangered others. Collective safety required everyone meeting production quotas. Meeting quotas meant building weapons that would kill Allied soldiers and extend the war. Failing to meet quotas meant punishments that killed prisoners. There was no moral position that avoided causing harm. Every choice involved calculating which harms were acceptable in exchange for which temporary safety. The fuselage measurement defect represented this calculation in its most concentrated form. Walter had 3 options. First, he could report the defect immediately, which would trigger investigation into which prisoners were responsible. Those prisoners would face punishment. Production schedules would slip. The entire work section would receive reduced rations. But the defect would be addressed properly before reaching quality inspection. Second, he could attempt emergency correction himself, using unauthorized methods to bring the section back into tolerance. This might work, or might damage the section further, or might be discovered by Weber during inspection, any of which would result in severe punishment. Third, he could report nothing and hope Weber's inspection missed this particular measurement, gambling that the defect would pass through to surface assembly, where it would be discovered far from this facility and blamed on problems during transport. All three options involved risks to different people. Reporting endangered the prisoners who made the original error. Emergency correction endangered Walter if discovered. Concealing the defect endangered the entire work section if Weber found it during inspection. Walter had to choose which people to expose to which risks, knowing that wrong choice might result in deaths. At 400 meters below ground, the air temperature remained constant at 14 degrees Celsius, regardless of season. The humidity from underground water seepage and human respiration created persistent dampness. Metal surfaces developed rust within weeks, despite oil coatings. Electrical systems required constant maintenance to prevent shorts. The prisoners who worked here never saw daylight. They descended the main shaft elevator at the start of their shift and ascended at the end, spending 12 hours underground in artificial light-breathing air that tasted of coal dust and machine oil. The physical effects of these conditions accumulated over weeks. First came the persistent cough from coal dust in the lungs. Then the headaches from reduced oxygen levels. Then the tremors in the hands from malnutrition and constant cold. Then the bleeding gums from vitamin deficiency. Then the muscle cramps from dehydration because the SS provided limited water. Then the cognitive impairment from cumulative effects of malnutrition, oxygen deprivation, and exhaustion. Most prisoners lasted 4 to 6 months before becoming too sick to work. The SS then transported them elsewhere. No one knew what happened to prisoners who were removed for being unproductive, but no one ever returned. The choice facing Walter involved not just immediate consequences, but long-term survival calculations. If he reported the defect, investigation might reveal systemic problems in the assembly process that would require production changes affecting all prisoners. If he concealed it, and Weber discovered it, the resulting punishment might target not just Walter, but other prisoners as collective deterrents. If he attempted correction and failed, the evidence of unauthorized modification would be worse than the original defect. Each choice created cascading consequences that Walter couldn't fully predict. The SS administrator responsible for underground aircraft production was Obersturmbannführer Hans Kammler, a career SS officer who had overseen construction of V-2 rocket facilities at Mittelbau Dora using concentration camp labor. Kammler approached industrial production with ruthless efficiency. He calculated that concentration camp prisoners represented free labor that could be worked to death and replaced with new prisoners from the continuous supply provided by the camp system. This calculation made underground factories economically viable despite horrific working conditions that killed workers rapidly. Kammler had ordered construction of multiple underground aircraft facilities across Germany starting in 1943, after Allied bombing destroyed significant surface production capacity. His approach was standardized: identify existing mines with adequate space and access, expand the underground areas using prisoner labor, install manufacturing equipment, staff the facilities with skilled prisoners and SS supervisors, maintain production through continuous replacement of prisoners who died or became too weak to work. The system functioned as designed, producing aircraft components while consuming human lives at calculated rates. The engineering challenges of underground production were substantial. Moving large aircraft components through mine shafts required custom material handling equipment. Maintaining temperature and humidity control for precision manufacturing in naturally damp underground environments required constant ventilation. Providing adequate lighting for assembly work in spaces designed for mining required extensive electrical installations. Disposing of manufacturing waste without contaminating underground water supplies required drainage systems. All these challenges were solved using prisoner labor that was considered expendable. Walter watched the clock. 90 minutes until inspection. He made his decision based on immediate survival calculation. He would attempt emergency correction of the fuselage section. The risk was personal. If discovered, he would face punishment directly. But concealing the defect risked collective punishment of the entire work section, which endangered Franz and 479 other prisoners. Reporting the defect would trigger investigation that might identify systemic problems leading to production changes that endangered everyone. Emergency correction was the option that concentrated risk on Walter alone. He requisitioned a pneumatic hammer from the tool station, signing out the equipment in his name, so there would be clear record if anything went wrong. He positioned the fuselage section on a support frame and began carefully working the aluminum skin, using small impacts to gradually adjust the metal back toward correct tolerance. The work required extraordinary precision. Too much force would crack the skin or create new deformations. Too little force would accomplish nothing. Walter had done this kind of emergency correction in his pre-arrest career at Messerschmitt, fixing manufacturing errors before they reached quality control. But that work had been done in proper facilities with adequate equipment and no threat of execution for failure. The underground factory's production supported a broader German strategy of protecting military manufacturing from Allied air superiority. By late 1943, Allied bombing had destroyed or severely damaged most surface aircraft production facilities in Germany. The Luftwaffe needed replacement aircraft faster than surface factories could produce them under constant bombing threat. Underground production offered solution: facilities that bombing couldn't reach, manufacturing that could continue regardless of air raids. The cost was using concentration camp labor in conditions that killed workers at extraordinary rates, but that cost was considered acceptable by SS administrators who viewed prisoners as replaceable resources. The Me-262 jet fighter represented Germany's attempt to regain air superiority through technological advancement. The aircraft could fly 100 miles per hour faster than Allied conventional fighters. But production problems limited its deployment. The jet engines required exotic metal alloys that were scarce in late-war Germany. Assembly required precision that was difficult to achieve with poorly trained workers or enslaved prisoners working in terrible conditions. Maintenance required specialized knowledge that Luftwaffe mechanics often lacked. These limitations meant that despite producing over 1,400 Me-262 aircraft, Germany never deployed enough to significantly affect air combat outcomes. Walter's emergency correction work took 40 minutes. He measured the fuselage section repeatedly, adjusting the aluminum skin in small increments until the tolerance fell within acceptable range. The final measurement read 0.02 millimeters off specification. Still imperfect, but within the 0.05 millimeter tolerance. The section would pass Weber's inspection if Weber didn't notice the pneumatic hammer marks that indicated unauthorized repair. Walter used fine sandpaper to blend the hammer marks into the surrounding surface texture, hoping the coal dust coating would conceal the evidence. Unterscharführer Weber arrived 15 minutes early, accompanied by 2 SS guards. He began his inspection at the far end of the factory floor, working systematically through each workstation. His routine was consistent: visual examination first, then measurement verification with his own instruments, then documentation of any defects in his inspection log. Prisoners watched him approach their stations with barely concealed anxiety. Weber's inspection meant potential punishment, reduced rations, or execution. Every prisoner hoped Weber would find nothing wrong with their work. When Weber reached Walter's station, he examined the fuselage section with particular attention. He ran his fingers over the aluminum skin, feeling for surface irregularities. He positioned his micrometer at 3 different points, checking tolerance. He studied the weld seams under portable inspection light. The examination took 4 minutes. Walter stood motionless, watching Weber's face for any sign of suspicion. The coal dust coating the section had concealed most evidence of repair, but Walter didn't know if concealment was adequate. Weber marked something in his inspection log. He moved to the next station without comment. The inspection continued for another hour. Weber found defects at 4 other stations: wiring improperly secured, a hydraulic fitting installed backwards, 2 welded joints that failed penetration testing. He documented each defect. The prisoners responsible received immediate beatings from the accompanying guards. Their food rations would be reduced for 1 week. The entire work section would remain on shift for an additional 2 hours to correct the identified defects. Walter's emergency repair had succeeded. The fuselage section passed inspection. But 4 other prisoners had been punished for errors that Walter might have prevented if he had been reviewing their work instead of focusing on his own survival. The moral calculation remained unchanged. Walter's success was purchased with other prisoners' suffering. There was no position in this system that avoided causing harm. The daily production quota for the underground factory was 12 complete fuselage sections, 36 wing components, and 48 smaller structural pieces. These components would be transported to a surface assembly facility where final aircraft assembly occurred. The complete production chain required coordination among multiple underground facilities across Germany, surface assembly locations, engine manufacturing plants, and testing airfields. The SS managed this supply chain using forced labor at every stage. Thousands of prisoners died building the infrastructure and producing the components that became Me-262 aircraft. By February 1945, Allied forces were advancing into Germany from both east and west. Soviet armies approached from Poland. American and British forces pushed through France and Belgium. The war was clearly ending in German defeat. But aircraft production continued in underground facilities because the SS command structure remained functional and prisoners remained available. The manufacturing had become divorced from any rational military purpose. Germany couldn't deploy aircraft fast enough to affect combat outcomes, couldn't train pilots to fly them effectively, couldn't produce fuel to operate them extensively. Yet production continued because the system itself was self-perpetuating. Walter survived underground work until April 1945, when advancing Allied forces captured the mine facility. He was among 180 prisoners still alive at liberation. 300 prisoners had died during the facility's operational period from malnutrition, disease, accidents, and execution. The Me-262 components they produced contributed to aircraft that killed Allied pilots and prolonged the war by some unknowable margin. Walter's careful work had enabled that production. His survival had required complicity in a system designed to consume human lives while manufacturing weapons. After liberation, Walter spent 3 months in Allied displaced persons camps, recovering from malnutrition and tuberculosis contracted underground. Red Cross helped him contact Franz Müller's wife, confirming that Franz had also survived and was recovering in a hospital in Western Germany. The promise Walter had made to keep Franz alive had been kept through combination of luck, Franz's own resilience, and Walter's careful navigation of the camp's moral compromises. In 1946, Walter emigrated to Argentina, joining thousands of other Germans seeking new lives far from the devastation of post-war Europe. He worked as an engineer in Buenos Aires, designing industrial equipment unrelated to military applications. He never discussed his concentration camp experience publicly. When historians approached him in the 1970s, researching underground aircraft production, he declined interviews. His only written statement about the period read, "I survived by building weapons for people I hoped would lose the war. That survival required moral compromises I cannot justify or explain. I will not celebrate that I survived when so many did not." Post-war assessment of underground aircraft production concluded that the facilities represented extraordinary engineering achievement purchased with unconscionable human cost. The technical challenges of manufacturing precision aircraft components 400 meters underground were solved through systematic application of skilled labor under brutal conditions. The Me-262 aircraft produced in these facilities performed comparably to those built in surface factories, demonstrating that the manufacturing processes were effective despite terrible working environments. But the strategic value of underground production was limited. By the time these facilities reached full production capacity in late 1944, Germany lacked pilots to fly the aircraft, fuel to operate them, and air superiority to deploy them effectively. The production effort consumed scarce resources and killed thousands of prisoners while generating minimal military advantage. The underground factories exemplified the self-destructive nature of Nazi Germany's late-war industrial strategy, maintaining production through slave labor even when that production no longer served rational military purposes. The mine facility that housed the underground aircraft factory was sealed after the war. Allied occupation authorities deemed it unsafe for civilian use due to structural damage and contamination from industrial chemicals. The entrance was blocked with concrete. The ventilation shafts were capped. The underground spaces remained as they were abandoned in April 1945, containing rusting equipment, abandoned aircraft components, and the marks of prisoners who worked there. In 1985, the local German government installed a memorial plaque near the sealed mine entrance. The plaque reads, "In memory of the concentration camp prisoners who were forced to work in this underground facility between 1944 and 1945. 300 died here. We remember their suffering and honor their memory." The plaque lists no names. Prisoner records were incomplete, and many prisoners were never identified. The memorial acknowledges atrocity without providing individual commemoration for most victims. Historians researching underground aircraft production have documented approximately 12,000 prisoners who worked in various underground facilities across Germany during 1944 and 1945. Of these, approximately 3,800 died from disease, malnutrition, accidents, or execution. The 720 Me-262 aircraft produced in these facilities represented average cost of 5 prisoner deaths per completed aircraft. This calculation excludes prisoners who died building the underground facilities before aircraft production began, or who died after being transported away when they became too sick to work. Franz Müller survived the war and returned to his trade as an electrician in Hamburg. He lived until 1979, dying at age 85. In his final years, he gave several interviews to historians researching concentration camp labor. When asked about working in the underground factory, Franz described the constant fear, the physical deterioration, the moral complexity of being forced to contribute to German war production while hoping Germany would lose the war. He emphasized that survival required both luck and small acts of solidarity among prisoners, sharing food, providing medical help, covering for colleagues who were too sick to work effectively. Franz mentioned Walter Reich specifically, crediting Walter's technical skill with maintaining production quotas that kept the entire work section from severe collective punishment. Franz described how Walter would review other prisoners' work informally, identifying problems before SS inspections, helping correct errors without drawing official attention. These small interventions reduced the frequency of failed inspections and the resulting punishments. Franz estimated that Walter's careful supervision saved dozens of prisoners from beatings or worse during the facility's operational period. Walter Reich died in Argentina in 1994 at age 79. His obituary in a Buenos Aires newspaper mentioned his career as an industrial engineer but made no reference to his concentration camp experience. After his death, his family donated his personal papers to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Among those papers were technical drawings from the underground factory, showing Me-262 fuselage sections with tolerance specifications and inspection requirements. Walter had kept these drawings for 50 years, hidden in a folder marked only with a date, April 1945. The drawings show extraordinary technical precision, measurements specified to hundredths of millimeters, weld requirements detailed with exact parameters, assembly sequences numbered and cross-referenced. They represent the same precision engineering that characterized German aircraft manufacturing throughout the war. Nothing in the technical documentation indicates these designs were implemented by starving prisoners working 400 meters underground in oxygen-depleted air with inadequate equipment. The drawings are purely technical artifacts, stripped of human context. But attached to one drawing was a small note in Walter's handwriting. Fuselage Section B-17, Emergency Repair, February 12, 1945. Tolerance restored through unauthorized correction. Weber approved without comment. Franz safe another day. The note provided the human context the technical drawing lacked. This particular aircraft component had been produced through improvised repair by a prisoner trying to protect a colleague from SS punishment. The technical precision shown in the drawing was achieved despite and within a system designed to be brutal. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum displays one of Walter's technical drawings in an exhibition about forced labor in Nazi Germany. The display includes context explaining that concentration camp prisoners produced significant percentage of German military equipment in final war years. The exhibition notes that prisoners faced impossible moral choice between refusing to work and being executed, or working and contributing to German war effort. There are no simple moral judgments in the display, only acknowledgement that prisoners navigated circumstances designed to make survival require moral compromise. Visitors to the exhibition can examine the technical drawing's precision and read Walter's attached note. The combination illustrates how Nazi Germany's industrial system functioned, technically sophisticated manufacturing processes implemented through brutal exploitation of enslaved labor. The same organizational capacity that produced precision engineering also produced systematic atrocity. Understanding one requires understanding the other. The mine facility remains sealed. The underground spaces still contain the factory equipment abandoned in 1945, assembly fixtures, pneumatic tools, measuring instruments, electrical installations, material transport systems. Coal dust covers everything. Rust has consumed most metal surfaces. The structural supports that kept the mine safe are degrading. German mining authorities conduct annual inspections to ensure the sealed entrance remains secure and that subsidence from underground deterioration doesn't threaten surface structures. No plans exist to reopen the facility or recover the equipment. The space functions as unintended memorial, abandoned place where hundreds died producing weapons for a cause they hoped would fail. Local historians have documented that 300 prisoners died at this specific facility during its operational period. That number comes from fragmentary SS records, Red Cross reports, and post-war testimony from survivors. The actual number might be higher. Not all prisoner deaths were recorded, and some prisoners who were transported away when they became too sick to work might have died elsewhere, but should properly be counted among this facility's victims. 300 is minimum confirmed number, not comprehensive accounting. Those 300 deaths purchased 720 Me-262 aircraft worth of components. The strategic value of those components was minimal. Germany lost the war regardless of underground aircraft production. The human cost was substantial. 300 lives ended, thousands more damaged by suffering that continued affecting survivors for decades. There is no equation that balances these accounting entries. The deaths served no purpose that justifies them. They were waste, atrocity normalized through bureaucratic industrial processes. Walter Reich's choice to perform emergency repair on the fuselage section in February 1945 exemplified the moral complexity that defined prisoner experience in Nazi concentration camps. He couldn't refuse to work without being executed. He couldn't sabotage production without endangering other prisoners. He couldn't work carelessly without failing inspections that triggered collective punishment. His only option was working carefully, maintaining quality, keeping the system functioning, hoping that Germany lost the war quickly enough that his survival wouldn't require too many moral compromises. The fuselage section he repaired probably reached surface assembly, was installed in an Me-262 aircraft, and was eventually destroyed when Allied forces overran German airfields in April 1945. The aircraft might have flown combat missions, it might have killed Allied pilots, or it might have been abandoned before deployment as Germany's military capacity collapsed. There's no way to know. The technical precision Walter applied to that repair was absorbed into war's chaos and became untraceable. What remained traceable was that Walter survived. Franz survived. 180 prisoners from that facility survived. They survived because they navigated impossible moral terrain carefully enough, with enough luck, that they reached April 1945 still alive. Their survival cost them pieces of moral certainty about who they were and what they had done. Walter's note about the emergency repair, "Franz safe another day," acknowledged both success and cost. Franz survived another day. The war continued another day. Both outcomes resulted from Walter's successful repair. The memorial plaque near the sealed mine entrance contains no individual names because most prisoners who died there are not individually identified in surviving records. The SS did not maintain complete documentation of prisoner deaths at work facilities. Some prisoners were registered only by number, not name. Some died and were cremated without any record beyond internal camp accounting. The families of these prisoners often never learned how or where their relatives died. The memorial acknowledges collective suffering without providing individual recognition that would require documentation that doesn't exist. This absence of names is itself part of the atrocity. The Nazi system deliberately treated prisoners as categories rather than individuals, as numbers rather than people. Post-liberation efforts to document who died, where, have been partially successful, but fundamentally incomplete. We know approximately how many died. We know some names. We cannot know all names. That incomplete knowledge is permanent. The documentary evidence was either never created or has been lost. Walter Reich's personal papers include one photograph taken inside the underground factory. The photograph shows a section of the factory floor with assembly fixtures, aircraft components, and several prisoners working. The prisoners' faces are not visible. They are turned away from the camera or too distant to identify. The photograph was probably taken by an SS officer for administrative documentation. Walter obtained a copy somehow during or after the war. On the back of the photograph, he wrote, 400 meters below ground, 14 degrees, coal dust in lungs, every breath counted. That photograph hangs in the Holocaust Memorial Museum next to Walter's technical drawing. The two items together tell more complete story than either alone. The technical drawing shows the precision engineering. The photograph shows the environment where that engineering occurred. Walter's note adds the human experience, counting breaths in oxygen-depleted air while trying to work precisely enough to avoid punishment. The final accounting of underground aircraft production acknowledges technical achievement and human cost without resolving tension between them. German engineers solved extraordinary technical challenges. Concentration camp prisoners built sophisticated weapons under horrific conditions. Both statements are true. The technical achievements do not excuse or minimize the human cost. The human cost does not erase the technical achievements. Both existed. Both are part of this history. Walter Reich built precision aircraft components to survive. His survival required complicity in system he morally opposed. That complicity cannot be celebrated, but neither can his survival be condemned. He navigated impossible circumstances using whatever options existed. He kept promises when possible. He helped colleagues when he could. He made repairs that passed inspection. He counted breaths. He survived. 300 prisoners at that facility did not survive. Their absence is permanent. Their names are mostly unknown. Their suffering purchased aircraft components that served military defeat. There is no redemption in this accounting, no silver lining, no ultimate justice. Only fact that atrocity happened, that some survived, that history remembers imperfectly, and that we must remember anyway because forgetting would be worse. The mine remains sealed. The memorial acknowledges what happened. The technical drawings and photograph preserve fragments of experience. That is what remains. Fragments, partial knowledge, imperfect memory of events that should never have occurred but did occur and cannot be undone. 400 meters below ground, in darkness, in coal dust, in thin air, prisoners built weapons and counted breaths and hoped to survive. Some did. The fact that any survived represents not justice but chance, persistence, and small acts of solidarity that made immediate difference even while changing nothing about the system that required those acts. That survival came at cost measured in moral compromises that survivors carried for remainder of their lives. Walter Reich's note, "Franz safe another day," expressed both relief and weight. Another day survived meant another day contributed to system. Relief and weight coexisted. Both were true. Neither canceled the other. The technical drawing remains precise. The memorial acknowledges loss. The sealed mine contains silent evidence. History remembers imperfectly but remembers. That imperfect memory is what we have. It must be sufficient because nothing else exists. That imperfect memory is what we have. It must be sufficient because nothing else exists.